Born in March the 30th, 1936, in a small town in southern West Virginia. My dad was a coal miner, and my grandfather was a coal miner and a farmer. I was the oldest of 5 children, and I was born at home. The first 3 of us were born at home. The last 2 were born in the hospital. I grew up around family and wonderful friends, and my grandfather took us to church as soon as we were 2 years old, and he could carry us or walk us to church. We had a little ways to go to church, and every morning the church bell would ring every Sunday morning at 15 to 10, so we knew to walk fast. And we climbed this little hill, went past the cemetery, and there was our church. A little white church with a steeple and a bell, of course. Years ago, that was the alarm system for fires. They rang the church bell. And you knew that everybody come and throw water. There weren't even volunteer firemen at that time. Finally, our little town did get a volunteer fireman group. I went to grade school. I could walk to grade school and come home for lunch. It was a brick building, six rooms, and the principal, by the time I got in the 6th grade, I was helping the principal in the office. But he also knew I liked to talk and joke around a little bit, and I'd get caught for that, and once in a while stood out in the hall. And one time he just laughed and said, "It looks like I'm going to have to put you in that little closet." Well, that straightened me out. There was a little broom closet there. I tried to quit that, and he was real nice. Mr. Bowling. I even remember his name, and I remember then after I had to go 8 miles to a middle school, and we rode the bus, and I really liked that bus ride. I still remember my bus driver, his name, F.M. Deskins, and I was fortunate enough to meet his wife once at the nursing home where my mom was. She come in for rehab. And she couldn't believe I still remembered her husband. I recognized her name, Deskins. So I told her I used to have a bus driver named F.M. Deskins, his initials, F.M. Deskins. And she said, "That was my husband. You could have floored me." Then I go on. My middle school and high school was it's called Welch on the Hill. On the hill, because we were on a hill. The buses had to back up to the school, and it was, like I said, that from 6th to 12th grades, and a big gymnasium. The new gymnasium was new. I had I suppose, a distant cousin, at least her husband was, that was my gym teacher, and she had been a basketball star in college, and our gym class I thought I was on a basketball team. It consisted of basketball practice a lot, because she loved that. And that started my running. I love to run. And we had a big playground. We could still go out there to the grade school after we left there. There was no fence around it. And we played and ran on that playground all the time. And I grew up this summer with stumped toes and sprained ankles because we ran so much, and we didn't exactly look where we were running. We were so excited, and I had that grandfather that took me to church when he quit work, He stayed in the garden. He raised tomatoes and took them to the grocery store by the bushel. And I learned a lot about gardening then because I had to help Grandpa. I mean, I followed him around like a little puppy dog, and my sister next to me followed my daddy around. And I can still smell the dirt when you pull green onions, because I pulled a lot of green onions to take in for go with the lettuce and so forth, wilted lettuce. And my great grandmother was still able to explain why I grew up with my grandfather and my great grandmother. Mom took care of him. She was the baby of 3 kids, and so she took care of her dad and her great grandmother who had raised her. Her mother died at when she was 6.5 months old, and Grandma was 46, and she had 5 children, and took in her 3 grandchildren, and her son-in-law, because he had grew up in Virginia, and his sisters each one wanted one of the children, or would take care of one of the children. They lived close, but Granny said if you don't want to separate them, you can just stay here with me and Mr. Fisher. She called her husband Mr. Fisher. He was about 20 years older than her, and she never called him anything but Mr. Fisher. We always thought that was highly unusual, but I guess not. And one day when Mom's sister, the middle one of the 3, was going to ran away to get married, she ran to the barber shop and grabbed her husband by the arm and said, Mr. Fisher, Pauline has run off to get married. And he said, the barber had the straight razor shaving his neck. He said, Elle, you're going to, his nickname for her was Elle, Nancy Ella was her name. Said, you almost got my throat cut. What can I do about it? So Granny just walked 3 miles and said all I come for was to see the marriage license. And she saw it and turned around and left. And later my aunt said, I think if Granny had just stuck her hand out, I'd have went with her. She was only 15. But that didn't happen, so she stuck with her husband until he died, and thank goodness the last 3 years he was saved. Last 3 years. They settled in North Carolina, Winston-Salem. That's south of us, south of West Virginia. Every summer, the miners all got 4th of July week and the week after, and we headed for North Carolina. And Bobby and I, we was excited. We couldn't wait to get there, and there were no fast food stores, so we got to stop along a creek in Virginia where there were picnic tables. We had to you carried your lunch everywhere you went. That was the thrill of our life. But on the way home, we cried. Me and Bobby sat in the back seat and mourned because we were leaving our aunt. Oh, she was lovable. And but now she didn't hesitate. If we were fussing and carrying on, she'd just sit us down, take a little lightweight switch, and just switch her leg. Here to go to one, and then the other, and then the other one. But we loved her greatly. And she died of cancer. She had a bad operation once and had to have blood before they tested it very good, and picked up some kind of problem from the blood transfusion. She had so many, and she had to be on medication, prednisone or something that it eventually it caused problems. And but then that was a bad event in her life. Then let's see, before that, let's see, it was in 45. Well, I don't remember what part of the school I was in, but at the end of during the 39 to 49 was the Second World War. And I've forgotten about, several years into it, my mom had a first cousin that was like a brother to her. She took care of him when he was a baby a lot. For my aunt, they lived with Grandma for a short time, with Great Grandma for a short time, and he was killed he was a medic, Corpsman W.P. Little, Liddle, and he was killed going to help a comrade on the first wave that hit Guadalcanal. And the Japanese were in, snipers were in holes in the mountain, hid, and they fired down on him, and he was in the first wave that got off of the ship to go help the soldiers. And they said, "We can't cover for you, don't go." He went, and his head was blown off. So later on, she had some comfort when they named a small destroyer after him, the USS Little, Liddle. That was another big event in our family's life. And it was during that time that my dad was 30 years old, and there were three of us. And me, my brother, 5 years younger than me, and a sister. And lost my train of thought.
Water's down here.
Water.
Yeah. Right here. It's water. Your water's right there.
Oh, damn it. That's what I need. Thank you. Excuse me. Where was it, Ruth? Where was it?
The USS Destroyer Little. The USS Destroyer Little.
Oh yes. And it helped her some when she got to christen the ship. When it is now dry docked, of course, for many years, but still in the records. And then right after that, my dad had a I don't know if he had, no, he wasn't the one. Another one of my uncles was killed in a mine explosion. He had a premonition. Said that morning, he said, "I feel like," said, this was my great aunt. He said, "Florence, I feel like the man that the house fell on, or the tree fell on." He had a all gone feeling or something. And he wasn't in there no time till the mine exploded, which that was common back then, but not, unless it was a real gassy mines, they didn't have that problem. They did have roof bolts fall out beside them and sometimes hit them, but they didn't have so many explosions. But my dad lost his leg. I call it somebody's laziness. They had thrown railroad ties just back in this motor barn, and he was guiding the guy back in it's dark in the mines, just a light over every miner's head. and he was riding on this little metal piece, and guided the man back in the barn, and it jumped the tracks, and it cut his ankle off. It cut his leg on ankle, foot completely off, just hanging by a thread, but the big bone in front of his leg cracked all the way up. They had to remove it below the knee, and he had to get used to a J.H. Hanger prosthesis. But he whittled him out one, and was driving the car before he got his artificial limb, because it was the right leg, and he had to learn to use his left leg to do both gas and acceleration and brake. And there wasn't no problem with the peg leg. I mean, he didn't use it to drive with. And he had a way, went through the 6th grade in school, but he could plumb a house, wire a house, mechanic on the old model of cars. He just could do anything he set his head to, which we were always thankful for, because we couldn't afford to hire it done. And it wasn't that people didn't go out hiring; they done their own work. They didn't have to go hunting jobs like that. And so then another big event was when I, of course, graduated from high school. And I knew from the 9th grade on, I helped take care of my great-grandmother, who was beginning to age. And I got interested in nursing. Also, a group of doctors' wives in Welch, West Virginia, they had a scholarship fund, and I heard about that, and I qualified, and we borrowed, Mom and Dad borrowed $200 to send me to a small school in Huntington, West Virginia. And Dad always said I would get lost in a roundhouse, but he had no problem driving to Huntington. First time, it fascinated us. He got to 29th Street, and he said, "Now, girls, start counting." I had a friend with me and my sister going for the first visit to the hospital. And he said, "Now start counting backwards. We're on 29th Street, and we got to go to 1st Street and 6th Avenue in Huntington to the old Huntington Memorial Hospital." And it was owned by Dr. Henry D. Hatfield, who was governor of West Virginia in 1939. And he combined, it was Kessler Hatfield, and then it became Huntington Memorial. He was an orthopedic surgeon, or just a general surgeon in those days. They did all kinds of surgery. And later on, I worked with one of his trainees, Dr. William J. Porter, in Wayne. I worked with him 11 years. He was the health officer and had a drugstore and a doctor's office. And he had graduated in 1934 in the top 10 of his class in Louisville, Kentucky State University. And he was a very smart man, but he had one little problem. He lost a little boy with diphtheria. When he was 5 years old, I believe. He'd already had a little pony and a little doctor bag and was following Daddy around on home visit. In fact, he delivered babies in the home. Dr. Porter did. And he got so upset by that, and plus the fact he was in a wreck and ruined his right hand for surgery, and he had to make a medical doctor. he just couldn't operate. And so he got into drinking alcohol. And that slowed him down a little bit. But then the last years he worked lived the 11 years I was at the Wayne County Health Department as a public health nurse. And now before that, I worked I met my husband before I went to the health department. I had met my husband in my training, second year of my training, but he was in the Navy, and in those days, they just threw you out of nursing school everywhere if you got married, because I mean it was more or less in the deal. You worked your way through. You had that little tuition, but you worked your way through. You had 2 weeks off in the summer to go visit your home, and to come back, and then you worked. And you also worked some for $1 an hour while you were in training after you'd been there a while. And the pharmacy did not take the medication up to the floors. We had medicine closets that we kept locked up with a box inside the medicine closet that had the pain medication in it. And we dispensed our own, we had to fill up our own medicine cups, even as a student in the last year. The last year you were in training. And the second year I was in training, 1956, I went in 54. And in 56 we spent, that would be 2 years, yeah, in Washington, D.C. at 3 different hospitals. Trained at St. Elizabeth's across the Potomac, 65 buildings at that time. Now, somehow psychiatric just didn't interest me. I mean, it interested me in a way, but at that time, it appeared to me that I called it psych them up and then give them a downer like, and then they psyched them up. And it just didn't make sense to me, because I grew up with a great-grandmother that just more or less pull up your shoestrings, little girl, and go right on. I mean, you had to keep on keeping on. And but my favorite was OB. And I wound up working 1.5 years in Cabell Huntington Hospital, Marshall University, Cabell Huntington Hospital. It wasn't Marshall University's then. I mean, they hadn't combined. And that was quite an experience. You were either one baby after the other, especially on the full of the moon. Why, I don't know, but it seemed that way. And or you were going around checking on the mothers and talking to them and helping eat their candy and anything else that you could think of that they needed. And they had lights over the doors then. You knew if somebody wanted you in the room. They didn't have the call system. Light come on over the door. We didn't have computers, so we had to go with the doctors and make rounds and write down what the patient said and what the doctor said and keep track of everything and go back and put it in the record. There just wasn't any computers or Xerox machines or copy machines, and that's just the way it was, and we got used to it. And no cell phones. We did have telephones. And after I quit then to have my family. I quit the OB when I was expecting my first child, Sherry Tucker, she was born in 1959, October. Cabell Huntington opened in 56, and she was born in 59. And Then I had less than 2 years later, I had a son, and he's born October the 6th, 1961, at the same hospital. And it was the OB unit that I later worked at, that I had worked at. So then a babysitter came looking for a job. She got scared. She got hurt at the butcher slaughterhouse next door to me, and she forgot to put her arm down in the meat mixer and didn't turn the electric off before she did, and it broke her arm. And she got out of that butcher slaughterhouse, and her daddy found her a job. He said, "I thought you might be going back to work." And I said, "Well, Jim, I never thought about it till I was going to wait." They were 1 and 3, my children. And I thought I'd planned to wait till the baby was about 5 or 6 years old. And I said, "Well, Jim, I guess we can get this house paid for sooner." And he kind of agreed. He'd been used to a working mother, and he was going to be at the slaughterhouse next door. And she was an A number one of 10 children. 9 or 10. And I went to their home and visited, and it all seemed great. No hot and cold running water, clean as a pin, and a washing on the line about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was good enough for me, because it was going to be room and board, and I was going to be there for 2:30 in the day, and Jim was going to be next door at the slaughterhouse. It worked out fine, no problems, and hardly any problems, I should say. And later she told me about another babysitter. When she got married, she told me about another babysitter. And she was from a family of 9 or 10, from the same area. And I visited her home, and it was the same situation. And those two, they are my, I still remember them. They were great and very, very good to my children. And no problems whatsoever with either one of them. And later I learned these women would have trouble with their babysitters. They keep changing babysitters. I said, "How do you get your babysitters? Are they recommended to you?" "No, I see the ad in the paper." That floored me. But I didn't say anything. But I didn't get mine that way. I forgot to tell you about my husband and I. We were saved and baptized in the Big Creek Missionary Baptist Church about April or May of 1957. We were baptized together. His dad helped the pastor, and we married at my home. The reason being, my grandfather and my great-grandmother were still living, and they couldn't make the trip. So we were married at where I grew up, Rhoderfield Christian Church. It's where my grandfather took us from the time we were 2. And my father-in-law and mother-in-law were able to come, and my future father-in-law and mother-in-law, and a couple of their kids. In fact, one of my husband's brothers was usher. He was a young usher, Richard Chadwick. Then we went on a short honeymoon down through Virginia. I saw some of my old friends from Washington, D.C. By the way, lots of other schools had sent their girls there, small hospitals, training hospitals, had sent their girls there for affiliation, they called it. And I got to see, I think it was a couple of them, and I enjoyed that very much. And then we get back, and he goes back to work at that time he wasn't at the slaughterhouse, he worked at Owens, Illinois Glass, which is no longer. but our area was big for glass factories. There was another one. We had another one. His father later said, "Jim, son, we need you at the butcher shop, at the slaughterhouse." And he and his daddy were very close. And he thought about it and prayed about it, I'm sure. And he transferred out to beside the house. He's worked there, and that always helped me when I had to leave the kids, that he was close by. And let's see.